Before the story begins, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so this channel can keep growing and bring you even more compelling stories. The first time my mother called my husband by his real name was the night my family needed him to save them. Until then, he had always been that locksmith, that restorer, that man I chose over everything they had planned for me. Her voice was shaking when she said, "Clara, listen to me. Your father is in trouble. Nolan made a terrible mistake. The banks are freezing accounts, and there is only one person in this city who can stop this from turning into a disaster." Then she said the words I never thought I would hear. "We need Julian tonight." I stood in the kitchen and said nothing. Our apartment was small, the kind of place my mother would have called temporary if she were feeling generous. The floor near the window tilted just enough for a coin to roll on its own. The pipes knocked when the shower shut off. The paint by the back door had chipped where grocery bags brushed against it too often. But it was ours. No one had bought it for us. No one could take it back. No one could threaten us with losing it if we chose the wrong life. My mother kept talking. Payroll was at risk. Vendors were threatening legal action. Investors were panicking. My father had not slept. Nolan was trying to fix things, which told me at once that he had already made them worse. Then her voice dropped and she said, "Clara, please." My mother did not say please to me. Not when I was a child. Not when I worked for my father's company. Not when she cut me off after I married Julian. In my family, help was never clean. It came with a condition, a reminder, a future debt waiting to be collected. Kindness was just control wearing better clothes. So when she said please, I knew they were desperate. A year earlier, if someone had told me my family would someday beg my husband for help, I would have laughed in disbelief. Not because Julian was incapable of helping them. Because my parents had never looked at him long enough to understand what kind of man he was. To them, Julian was a man with brass dust on his sleeves, old wood under his nails, and a workshop in a neighborhood they only mentioned when they wanted to sound cultured at dinner. That was all they allowed themselves to see. My father owned a hotel company that people in our city loved to call elegant. My mother guarded that image like it was sacred. My brother Nolan was the heir, the son people excused before he had even failed, because men like him are often mistaken for talent while they are still only confidence. And I was the daughter who was expected to be polished, useful, and easy to direct. From the outside, we looked perfect. We had the photographs, the galas, the press, the charity dinners, the old money silence that made other people feel they had entered something too refined to question. But inside our house, love had terms. You were safe when you were obedient. You were praised when your choices reflected well on the family. You were protected as long as you stayed inside the life that had already been chosen for you. I had known that for years. I just did not understand the full cost of it until I met Julian. The day I first saw him, I had just walked out of one of those meetings where your work is taken from you so casually that the humiliation arrives before the anger. I had spent 2 weeks preparing a branding proposal for a redevelopment project downtown. My father glanced at it, slid it across the table, and told one of Nolan's friends to take over because the room needed a steadier hand. He never even looked at me. I left before I said something I would not be forgiven for, got into my car, and drove without any plan. I crossed the river, past Mercer Street, and ended up outside the old Mercer Theater, the project my family had been circling for months. Nolan wanted to turn it into a private club. My father wanted the prestige. My mother wanted the launch party. I sat in the car longer than I meant to. Then I saw Julian by the side entrance. He was crouched beside an old lock mechanism with a tray of tools on the pavement next to him. Traffic moved around him. A truck rattled over broken asphalt. Someone yelled from across the street. None of it seemed to touch him. He had that rare stillness some people carry, the kind that makes noise feel far away. I got out of the car for no reason I could explain. He looked up and asked, "Do you need to get inside?" I said no. I was just looking. He nodded once and went back to work. Most men in my world filled silence because they were nervous around it. Julian did not. He let it sit there until I asked what he was doing. He held up a worn brass piece between 2 fingers and said, "I am trying to undo years of bad repairs without ruining something that was built to last." Then he added, "People damage strong things when they only care about making them look newer." That line stayed with me. Maybe because it was simple. Maybe because it sounded like it belonged to more than a door. I went back 3 days later. Officially, I had a reason. My family was still discussing the theater. Unofficially, I wanted to see him again. Julian was inside the lobby that day, working beneath a long strip of dusty afternoon light. The whole place smelled like old wood, stone, and metal warmed by his hands. He remembered me without acting impressed by it. We talked for 20 minutes. Then I came back the next week. Then again after that. He told me he had started working with his grandfather when he was 14. He said old buildings taught patience better than most people did. He said the best restoration work was almost invisible, because if everyone noticed it, someone had probably tried too hard to make it show. He asked what I did, and I told him I worked in branding and development. He asked whether I liked it. I said I was good at it. He smiled a little and said, "That is not the same thing." No one in my family ever asked what I liked. They asked what was smart, useful, strategic. Julian asked questions like the answers mattered for reasons beyond status. That was part of what drew me in so fast. He did not speak to me like I was an extension of my last name. He spoke to me like I was a person who might still have a life of her own under all the polish. There were also things about him that did not fit the story my family would later invent. A city official once crossed the entire lobby just to shake his hand. An architect old enough to be his father asked his opinion before approving a change. A woman in a dark coat delivered documents one afternoon and called him Mr. Vale in a tone that made it clear he was not just another contractor. I noticed these things, but I never pushed too hard. Julian had a way of making privacy feel natural instead of suspicious. He was not secretive. He just did not perform himself for people. The first time I brought him coffee, his fingers were cold from working with metal. The second time, he already knew my order. By the third week, I was telling him things I had never said out loud. How tired I was of being useful. How every success in my life felt partly rented because my family had paid for the doors that opened before I reached them. How support in my house never felt like safety because I knew it could be taken away the moment I disappointed the wrong person. Julian listened in a way that made most people seem careless by comparison. Then one evening, when I admitted I did not even know whether my family's version of love had ever been real, he said, "There is a difference between being cared for and being managed. Most people do not see it until they try to leave." That was the moment something inside me shifted. He was not rescuing me. He was naming what I had been living inside for years. I told my family about him 2 months later. It happened at Sunday dinner, the kind of meal that looked warm in photographs and felt cold in real life. My father asked what Julian did. My mother asked what family he came from. Nolan started smiling before I had even finished answering. When I said that Julian worked in restoration and security systems for historic properties, Nolan laughed. My father did not. He just stared at me and asked, "Is this serious?" I said yes. My mother asked whether I understood what people would say. I asked why that was her first question instead of whether I was happy. No one answered. That silence told me everything. In some families, love feels like home. In mine, it felt like a role. Nolan was allowed to fail loudly and still be called promising. I was expected to succeed quietly and never become inconvenient. The moment I chose a life my parents could not fold into their plans, I stopped being a daughter and became a problem. My father had Julian investigated within a week. He called me into his office and placed a folder on his desk. Business records, property records, old clippings, photos of the workshop. He tapped the file and asked, "Are you really willing to throw away your future for this man?" I asked if he had found anything dangerous. He said, "That is not the point." But it was the point. He had gone looking for shame and found none. So he decided ordinary would have to count as failure. My mother tried a softer strategy. She came to my apartment with pastries from a bakery I loved as a child and used the careful tone she always used when she wanted to sound kind without giving up control. She said I was overwhelmed. She said I was romanticizing simplicity. She said men like Julian seemed appealing until real life began. Then she offered me a way out. End it quietly, she said. Spend a few weeks away. Come home before people start talking. I told her there was nothing to end. She looked around my apartment, at the books on the floor and the chipped table by the window, and said, Clara, do not make us choose between you and the future of this family. That sentence changed everything. It made the truth impossible to ignore. Money in my family was never just money. It was approval. It was control. It was comfort offered on the condition that you stayed inside the shape they had designed for you. A lot of people mistake that arrangement for love because it arrives wrapped in expensive things. I had done the same for years. Once I refused to leave Julian, the pressure became practical. Cards linked to family accounts stopped working. Meetings at my father's company moved without me. My access to files was reduced. A role I had been told was mine suddenly went to one of Nolan's friends. Recruiters who had once sounded eager became difficult to reach. No one said my father's name. No one had to. Nolan enjoyed all of it. He posted a photo from a rooftop party one night with a caption about standards. That was the kind of cruelty he preferred, the kind that could still be called a joke if anyone challenged him. Through all of this, Julian never told me what to do. He never used my family's behavior to prove anything about himself. He just stayed steady while everything around me tried to shake. One evening, after another rejection that felt less like business and more like my father closing another door, I went to Julian's workshop and sat there trying not to cry. He made tea in 2 chipped mugs, handed one to me, and waited. I asked him what would happen if my family really cut me off. He said, "Then you will finally learn which parts of your life were ever yours." A week later, my father made one last offer. He invited me to the house and placed a set of keys on his desk, along with papers for a condo he had once promised me as an investment. He said the condo, a salary increase, and a leadership title in the company could still be mine if I ended the engagement before it became public. He said he was trying to protect me from embarrassment. I pushed the keys back toward him. His face changed at once. "Then leave with nothing," he said. So I did. Julian and I got married 6 weeks later in a restored warehouse near the river. It was not grand by my family's standards, but it was warm, alive, and real. Our guests were the kind of people who moved chairs without being asked and stayed late to stack plates. A florist friend helped with the tables. One of Julian's oldest friends fixed the sound system 20 minutes before the ceremony. Someone's aunt brought extra desserts because she was afraid we might run short. That room held more real care than most events my parents had ever hosted. When I walked toward Julian, he looked at me the way he always did, like there was nothing about me that needed to be corrected before it could be loved. For a few minutes, I thought the day would belong to us. Then my family arrived. They came and dressed for an audience. My mother wore the expression she saved for public disappointment. Nolan looked entertained. My father stood at the center of the room as if he had arrived to make a statement, not attend a wedding. And he had brought witnesses. Investors. Donors. Old family connections. If he was going to punish me, he wanted people there to watch. Dinner kept moving because no one knew how to stop it gracefully. Julian thanked guests. He checked on my friends. He made sure I ate something when he realized I had barely touched my plate. He stayed calm in a way that made my father's performance look even uglier by contrast. Then the toast came. My father stood with a glass in his hand and spoke about legacy, standards, sacrifice, and what it meant to protect the future of a family. Every word sounded polished. Every sentence was designed to make cruelty sound noble. Then he said that because I had chosen this marriage against his wishes, I would receive nothing further from him. No inheritance. No trust. No role in the family business. Nothing. He called Julian ordinary. He called my choice reckless. He said love looked brave in your 20s and expensive in your 30s. For a moment, I could not breathe. Then Julian took my hand and said, "Calm enough for the entire room to hear, then keep it." That was all. No speech. No anger. No begging. And, because he was steady, I found my own voice. I stood up and said that if belonging to my family required me to judge people by money, usefulness, and status, then I had already belonged there too long. I said the only person in that room who had never asked me to trade love for approval was the man my father had just tried to humiliate. Then I sat down. Something changed in me that night. The worst thing my family could do had finally happened in public, and I was still standing. The next morning, my life was smaller. Smaller apartment. Smaller bank balance. Smaller grocery runs. Smaller margin for error. And yet, there was relief in it too. When comfort has always been conditional, losing it can feel strangely clean. You stop waiting for someone else to decide whether you are allowed to live. At first, I tried to find work the usual way. Consulting. Brand strategy. Freelance contracts. Anything that might let me build something without asking my father for air. The answers came back thin and cold. A director I respected admitted that hiring me might create problems with my family. Another recruiter stopped responding the moment he understood exactly whose daughter I was. So I stopped waiting for doors other people controlled. I built a small branding studio at our kitchen table. At the start, it was tiny. A local florist. A ceramics maker. The bakery downstairs. I worked late, surrounded by sketches, coffee cups, and invoices that mattered more to me than any polished title ever had. Julian looked at every draft as though it deserved serious attention. He could tell immediately when something sounded expensive instead of true. Luxury is easy to fake, he told me once. Truth is harder. Around that time, I started noticing more about him. A black car waited outside the workshop some mornings. Men and women in office clothes stepped inside with folders and came out looking like a decision had been made. An older woman named Denise dropped off documents one afternoon and thanked him for protecting staff contracts on a project I had never heard of. Once, a bank called during dinner and Julian stepped outside to take it. I asked him, only once, if there was something about his life I did not understand. He smiled and said, "There is. I just want to tell it in the right moment." The answer should have bothered me more than it did. But Julian had never lied to me. He had simply never introduced himself in the language my family respected. Meanwhile, my old life was beginning to crack. Nolan pushed the company into a fast expansion plan because he thought bigger always looked stronger. My father let him, because fathers like mine often confuse confidence in their sons with competence. There were glossy articles, investor dinners, launch parties, and interviews about the future of luxury hospitality in the city. Underneath all that shine, the debt was getting sharper. Then the trouble started. A contractor dispute became a lawsuit. One of the new properties underperformed. Payments slipped. Suppliers got nervous. Staff turnover increased. The whispers started before the headlines did, which is usually how real trouble moves. My mother called once during that season to ask whether I was settling into married life. It sounded casual, but I knew her well enough to hear the real question under it. "Are you struggling enough to come back yet?" I told her I was fine. She said, "One day you will understand that comfort matters." I looked around our apartment, at the restored table Julian had made shine again, at the work spread across it, and thought, it does matter. Just not more than peace. That was the life I was standing in when she called asking for help. By the time she finished explaining the crisis, I understood the shape of it. Nolan had tied too much of the company's future to one aggressive deal. When one major project failed to hit projections and the contractor dispute triggered a financial review, lenders tightened everything at once. Accounts were frozen. Vendors were threatening action. Payroll was at risk. I asked the only question that mattered. Why Julian? There was silence on the line. Then my mother said, "Because the firm that bought the debt is his." For a second, I thought I had heard her wrong. She repeated it slower. A holding group had acquired the distressed debt package months earlier. The letter sent that afternoon was signed by Julian Vale. Not contractor. Not consultant. Chairman. I sat down very slowly. All the loose pieces of the last year shifted into place at once. The officials who deferred to him. The banker calls. The documents. The calm. The fact that serious people always seemed to know exactly who he was even when my family had dismissed him as insignificant. When Julian walked in carrying oranges and bread from the market downstairs, he saw my face and knew. "Your mother called," he said. I nodded. He set the bag on the counter and came closer. There was no smugness in him, not even a trace of it. That mattered. You knew this might happen, I said. I knew they were exposed, he said. I did not know it would happen this fast. Then he finally told me the truth in full. His grandfather's workshop had become the foundation for a much larger business over the years. Julian had expanded it into restoration, preservation, urban security, redevelopment, and strategic acquisitions. He kept the workshop because it was where the work began. He believed people got worse when they moved too far from the thing that had taught them discipline. He had not hidden from me. He had simply never mistaken display for honesty. Your family saw what they wanted to see, he said. I let them. The meeting was set for 9 the next morning. It took place in a private boardroom at my family's flagship hotel, the same hotel Nolan had used as a stage for half his worst ideas. When Julian and I walked in together, everyone in the room looked at him first. My father looked older than he had a month earlier. Nolan looked angry, which was his favorite way of avoiding shame. My mother stood with her hands clasped too tightly in front of her. There were lawyers, lenders, and 2 restructuring advisors who already looked tired of cleaning up rich people's messes. Julian greeted everyone by name. That was the moment my father understood the scale of his mistake. Not because Julian had money. My father knew plenty of rich men. Because Julian belonged in that room in a way my family had never imagined. The terms he offered were strict, but fair. His firm would stabilize the debt and protect payroll. Vendors and contractors would be paid first. Nolan would be removed from decision-making immediately. My father would step aside after a transition period. Expansion would stop. Image spending would stop. And the Mercer Theater, the building my family had wanted to turn into a private club for the wealthy, would be restored as a public arts space under the new structure. Julian was willing to save the company. He was not willing to save their pride. Nolan snapped first. He called the terms personal. He called them punitive. He accused Julian of using a crisis to settle a score. Julian let him finish and said, "If this were personal, I would let you collapse." The room went still. Then my father turned to me, which was the saddest part of all. Even in that moment, with everything around him shaking loose, some part of him still believed I might help him preserve the old shape of his world. "Clara," he said, "tell him these terms are excessive." I looked at the papers. I looked at the people in that room who were trying to save jobs Nolan had treated like numbers. Then I looked at my father, the man who had once offered me a condo and a title in exchange for leaving the person I loved. And I understood something with complete clarity. My family had never really been offering me family. They had been offering access, approval, safety with strings attached. Not family. My mother spoke next. Her voice was careful now, respectful in a way it had never been toward Julian before. She said mistakes had been made. She said no one wanted permanent damage. She said there had to be a way to move forward together. Julian did not answer her. He looked at me, not because he needed permission, but because he knew the last part belonged to me. So I spoke. I said the terms were fair. The shock on Nolan's face would have been funny if that room had not cost so much to reach. I said workers should not lose their jobs because my brother confused arrogance with skill. I said contractors should be paid before my family spent another dollar protecting appearances. I said turning the Mercer Theater into a public art space was the first intelligent thing tied to that deal from the beginning. And I said I would not help rebuild a system that only remembered I was family when it needed something from me. My father stared at me like he no longer understood the language I was speaking. Maybe he didn't. It was the first time I had ever spoken to him without fear hiding in my voice. The meeting ended quietly after that. That felt right. The loudest part of this story had never been the truth. It had been ego. 2 days later, they signed. The company survived, smaller and less glamorous. Nolan lost his position. My father lost control. Employees kept their jobs. Contractors were paid. The Mercer Theater was finally given the future it deserved. And I did not go home. Because by then, home no longer meant my mother's flowers, my father's rules, or a dining table where every kindness carried a price. Home was the apartment above the bakery. Home was the restored table in the kitchen. Home was the life I could stand inside without shrinking. A week after the deal closed, my mother called again. This time she did not ask for help. She asked whether we could have lunch, just the two of us. I told her maybe one day. Not because I wanted revenge. I didn't. Revenge is smaller than people think. It gives you a moment, not peace. I said maybe one day because I had finally learned the difference between opening a door and walking back into a cage. That evening, Julian and I passed the Mercer Theater on foot. Workers were inside. The front doors were open. New lights had been installed in the lobby, and the restored brass handles caught the last gold of the sunset. Julian rested his hand lightly on one of them and smiled. "Some things are worth saving," he said. A year earlier, I would have thought he was only talking about the building. Maybe he was. But I knew he meant something else too. Not blood. Not status. Not the kind of family that loves you only when your choices flatter them. He meant dignity. He meant self-respect. He meant the quiet kind of love that does not need control to feel secure. My parents once tried to frighten me with the idea of leaving with nothing. What I learned is that nothing changes shape when you stop confusing luxury with safety. Sometimes the smaller life is the first honest one. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the only one in the room who knows how to build, protect, and restore what actually matters. And sometimes the door that closes behind you is not the end of your life at all. It is the first thing that was ever truly yours.